Welcome to Accelerate, and I'm Nicola Graham. So today we're joined by Jordan, and I am really pleased to have this conversation because we have been planning this for actually quite a while. But Jordan is joining us from the East Coast of America, and as diaries and schedules have allowed, we've finally managed to get this conversation in. So welcome, Jordan. And I'd love you to tell the listeners a little bit about your journey and where you're at to talking around kind of sports tech, because it's quite a fascinating journey.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me, and super excited to finally got time to sit down and have this conversation, because I think it's been brewing for months, so really excited to be here. So thank you. And a bit about me. I don't want to ramble on for too long, but I have 15 years in working in high performance sport across the facet of different, performance settings and everything from individual sports and team sports practitioners, and working with, athletes across 4 different continents, which has given me, a kind of a very broad and a wide base to kind of focus on what my really, passions are and how I really want to drive the conversation forward in terms of performance innovation and how we can kind of translate to that to athletes and keeping them at the center of, everything that we do, because ultimately I see it as a service-based industry. And so we have to keep that in mind in everything that we do. As far as we want to take innovation, we have to take the athletes and take them on that journey with us. So yeah, it's been a great journey, but excited to be here and share some of my little tidbits and wisdom with you guys. So yeah.
Brilliant. And what really kind of struck me when we started conversations was you've gone from that kind of applied world, you're now towards the end stage of your PhD, which I bet you're absolutely thrilled to be the end of it rather than the beginning end now. And that knowledge that you've then taken and taking that back full circle into kind of applied environments, because really that's the crux, I suppose, of innovation in sport, isn't it? Like, you could do loads of innovation, loads of research, and if it doesn't actually get out into the real world, then it doesn't really matter. So talk to us about that whole implementation and how you started to research and look into wearables and the areas that you've been looking at in sports tech.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think I had this kind of idea the other day and just thinking about, like, what is innovation? Like, what is it to us as like humans? Like, what are we actually trying to gain from it? Like, how far do we want to take that? And for me, innovation is such a big buzzword now. And it's like, how can we, push things forward? How can we create this momentum, right? And it's the huge thing in sports. Like, we want to build momentum. We always want to be in a state of momentum and not, friction or resistance. And so we kind of always think that, we have to be at the cutting edge. We have to be, innovating all the time, right, to keep this momentum. When really and truly, I think we've kind of lost sight of that understanding that innovation is not the outcome. Like, we're not trying to innovate more. We're not trying to create more. We're actually trying to translate and create better connection, whether it's with the athletes that we're working with, whether it's with, the leadership or the people we're trying to inspire, the next generation, right? And so for me, that's the crux of what we're trying to do is, and sometimes I feel like we've lost sight of that. But I guess I started on this journey, probably nearly 15 years ago now, where I was an intern and luckily I had a great mentor at the time that allowed me to, see different facets of, what sports technology could do, and the innovations in testing and analysis and doing things with, Team GB at the time, Harlequins rugby were around at Surrey Sports Spark at the time. And that just opened my eyes to the possibilities of, what sports tech and sports innovation can look like across different platforms and different mediums. And then fast forward after that, gone through kind of like my basic academic, pathway, did kind of all the basic studying and such, and then had some great opportunities to go and work in elite football in the UK, and that was amazing. So I worked in the Premier League for a number of years for different teams, and that was, to me at the time, the golden standard. I thought, this is it doesn't get much better than this, and I had to kind of take a step back and think, I was very early in my career at that time and very fortunate to have that exposure. And ultimately I didn't feel fulfilled in certain ways. It was almost like the essence of like that purity that I kind of started out with, being an athlete myself, in track and field. That kind of seemed to be lost in terms of how we connected with the athletes, how we kind of saw them as, I remember a player, I won't mention his name at the time, but he basically said we're seen as machines, right? And that's how they're kind of being looked at. And I had to take a step back and think, wow, like it's so true. Like we are asking so much from you. And at that time I was the guy collecting all the data. I was the guy there, with a clipboard every morning, asking them questions and probing them and prodding them in every which way I could. And so don't get me wrong, it was great and amazing experience, and I'd never take it back. But that kind of gave me that wider perspective of understanding that, we are dealing with humans here. Like we're dealing with people, and people outside of just, what they do for their day-to-day living, right? They're trying to provide for their families, but ultimately they're still people that we need to take care of in order for them to thrive, and ultimately for us to thrive as practitioners, right? And so forward from that, I got a kind of curveball opportunity to go out and work in Asia. And that was where it really kind of set things in perspective for me in terms of understanding that we have, our culture within environments that we kind of try to build and, I guess, create and try and help, them in their own space to create an ecosystem that is effective for high performance. But then we also have culture in general, that everyone's coming from different places. And I was in a microcosm of that in the UK, because it was very, we had international players from all over. But then taking that trip over to Asia and working over there for 4 years and being immersed in the culture there, it was no, there's no way that we can just kind of think that this is the gold standard and we can translate that and transform it into something, effective here. And that was hugely eye-opening to me, to see that there's a huge gap between, the culture that you kind of set in an environment, a high performance environment, what that looks like, as opposed to, how that translates to different cultures and different belief systems. And so that was kind of the big bombshell moment for me in my career, where I was like, well, I need to do things differently here and take a kind of a different approach.
What did that make you want to do differently then? Because there's quite a lot around definitely the human aspect around sport.
Yeah.
Tech can be quite the same in some respects, because it takes away it aims to simplify some of that. So were they conflicting kind of thoughts and, I suppose, theses within your head?
Yeah, I guess it was almost like we were a team that went in there, that had this big, bright, potential coming from what would say, be the gold standard, the Premier League, and thinking that we could kind of translate that across. And so I kind of came up with this concept of, we're not trying to install things, or we're not trying to deploy a system or a process or even a philosophy, right? We have to translate it in a way that is going to be digestible for the actual people that we're actually trying to influence, right? We're trying to change the whole, we're trying to actually create something within that environment that is going to be conducive to everyone, thriving and succeeding. And so for me, it was a few definitely hard, life lessons that I had to learn and humble myself, honestly, and really, take a step back and think that I might think that I know all the answers, but really I don't. I don't know what the best thing is for this person that, comes from a completely different background to me, completely different belief system, and how they see high performance is very different, and it's through a different lens. And so that gave me a very broader perspective of, having to translate information in different ways and finding different solutions. And like you said, technology can be a great purveyor of that. It can definitely help that kind of, integration of new ideas.
Isn't it? It's that's the number kind of thing, but you've still got to then communicate that number.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's you have the data, you have the insights, and everyone's insights. But then it's in certain in Asia, it's wisdom, right? Wisdom is a huge thing, because the elder, the hierarchy of the different elders within a system. So just to give you an example, I was in a team, they were the best team in that league at the time. And they'd had serial winners. They'd been winning the league for a number of years, and they wanted to basically take over Asia, and the Asian Champions League basically was their target to win that. And so that's why they wanted, some more foreign influence. They wanted to try and translate what success, the Premier League had and translate that over. But ultimately that hierarchy system of, someone right at the top making all the decisions wasn't how we operated in the UK necessarily. There was a more, divergent understanding of how we, take ownership of different decisions and how like the authority is kind of shared across different stakeholders. Whereas in Asia, I would say that's not necessarily all the case all of the time. Unfortunately, there's more. So like a one pictorial figure. And so understanding how to, really influence that type of dynamic is so different. And that's why I had to be very creative, right? And then for me, the biggest thing is trust, right? It's trust with athletes, but it's also trust with the decision makers too. Like they've got to feel comfortable with you, going there and trying to do something different and changing, what worked for them in the past.
So fast forward then to when you started to want to actually, I suppose, go back to that academic side and really study and research this in more depth, where there's a lot of obviously perspectives and skills that you would have learned in those different environments. How did you bring those then into how you started to look at wearables and data through a PhD lens?
Yeah. And so that was another huge step in, I guess, another kind of risk that I wanted to take, just because I really wanted to challenge myself, and I felt like I'd given everything I could to that program, and imparted some really great practitioners and helped develop a system. And I kind of came away thinking that, I knew all the answers and I was going to be the one to change the world there. Where in real fact, what happened was I was able to shape, other people's careers, that were actually locals in that environment. And they, were the ones to take ownership of that and take it forward, because, we always have this thing of, where we, go over to a place and when we, want to put a program in place, want to create some innovation, it's like, okay, but is it sustainable for the future? What happens after you leave? Right. And so that was for me in understanding that I had to, take a step back and realize that life goes on after me. And that was really a huge learning. And I was really grateful for that experience, to know that, it's about being able to empower other people. And I was able to do that in a really interesting way. And through technology and the advancements that I'd seen, I kind of came up with this idea around, how can we more digestibly translate that information and those innovations that we have, from the UK, from all the Western population into, I guess, more, let's say, under-resourced environments. And so that was how I kind of came about the project, while I was working with the MBA, the company that were specializing in wearable technology. And their technology was, a lot more affordable. It was a lot more portable. It's, had a lot more practicality for the situations where, there wasn't that level of infrastructure. And so I guess that's the beauty of technology, is that as those innovations start to get a little bit more accessible, we can give those a level of insights. And that's where I really wanted to, try and shape the, the next phase of my career and understanding that and how that's.
That makes sense. But similar to, I suppose, like a startup in sports tech, I've now spoken to a few people who have started their PhD journey, and you start along one direction and path, and quite often conversations, learnings, it starts exploring into different routes. And what you started on your PhD and where that's taking you now, where you're towards the end of it, what are the learnings and what are you now taking into, I suppose, back into from that research into the applied world of how sports tech, wearables, the learnings that you've had in that are really influencing how you translate that information back into the applied world now?
Yeah, no, it's always interesting. I think it's quite a common thing in PhDs for them to kind of go that way, and you start with a very narrow, refined question, and it kind of opens your eyes to a bigger problem. But I guess for me, I got really not frustrated, but I guess that translation piece, right, was like it kept coming up time and time again, and like understanding, like I said before, deployment and kind of adoption doesn't necessarily mean impact in an environment. Like, how are you really leaving a, like I said, lasting impact? Like, is it going to be sustainable? Is it something, we're just trying to collect information, but for what purpose? What's the greater purpose here? And so that was where I really started to get into implementation science and what does that look like? What does that really mean on a day-to-day level with practitioners that are trying to ultimately, influence performance and sustain that momentum that sometimes technology can create a friction in an environment. So I won't give a specific example, but I was working with the MBA at the time with a mass amounts of, resources, and we had a huge tension. And I kind of like to refer to this, this kind of concept now of like this tension, kind of flux between tension and transformation. So we're constantly, if we're adding things to an environment, we're always creating some level of tension. And that doesn't even necessarily mean technology, right? It could be, a new person coming into the environment, a new idea, whatever. And so having that understanding that we're constantly in that flux between trying to translate that tension into something that is effective and transform it into, a performance outcome or, a better relationship, a better process. And so understanding that we're kind of constantly in that flux between understanding how those different, external things can help us and kind of shape the direction that we're going is really where I kind of think about a lot of the problems that you kind of see in high performance. And so everyone's coming with different stakeholders have different, problems that they're trying to solve. Right, we're all hopefully getting to one common goal at the end, but we're all coming at it from different angles and different perspectives, and so that creates its own level of tension, right? And then you have the tension around the athletes, surrounding the athletes, and what they're trying to achieve. And for example, when I was working in the NBA, we were trying to. Our goal was to get guys into the league, get them drafted, and it was a huge thing, a huge push to try and get as many guys as we could into the league. And we were successful at doing that, but there was still always that tension of who's invested in certain ways, right? Different investments for different reasons. And so, my kind of broader perspective now is to try and always understand, take that, I guess, kind of zoomed out approach of understanding who's coming from what perspective and how can we kind of create some commonalities, but not always understanding that we might not always agree, but we just need to have that clarity.
But disagreeing is okay as well, right, isn't it? Because it actually is a really positive aspect because it means you haven't got groupthink and you have got diverse perspectives and there is cognitive diversity within there. And so ideally you should then come to a better collaborative decision going forward. But egos, different communication styles, different languages, reality of kind of those can all be barriers to that, can't they?
100%. And that's why we spoke about it before, just offline, and one of these kind of frameworks there's some research that's kind of been done around it, and it's still evolving in terms of how we really understand how we implement technology or different ideas into a high performance environment. And this idea of burden, right? There's different levels of burden. There's burden placed on the athlete. There's burden placed on the practitioner. There's burden placed on, all the different stakeholders. But how much of that time and effort is required, to really see that innovation through? Like, what's the return on the investment if that burden is so high? And that's a critical question that an organization has to ask. We were heavily resourced in terms of financial, support, but not necessarily in terms of human capital support. And so that's huge disconnect there. So this kind of framework I've kind of been developing is a lot around that, and it's called the bias in technology selection evaluation. But it's trying to understand, how to create a process for an organization or a team that helps to streamline their understanding and thinking before, selecting a new technology or buying a new technology, which they get flooded every day with. And create some understanding of how they can change their environment or come up with a new best solution. So burden is one of them. And then what's the level of intrusion on the athlete ultimately, like how intrusive it's going to be for them in their daily workflow. And for me, the the probably biggest thing in trying to create a seamless, impactful product is how intrusive it's going to be, like how seamlessly can it fit into the workflow, that aspect. And so I'll give you an example as well from the NBA. I tried to, really scope out and understand what the demands of the athlete were on a day-to-day level. If I was really going to try and place this product in a position where they were able to do it without, it's almost like it's invisible to them. Like they didn't even know they were doing it. And that's like
Yeah.
the level we have to try and
You
kind of get.
you can come at that because you have that practitioner background, though. People that are non-practitioners or non-clinical who are then creating sports tech products, how do you feel how will they overcome those real life adoption implementation issues? Do you see them just using more and more practitioners going forward who have lived both worlds, or do you think there's a way that the tech is built going forward, or even communicated and talk, like the narrative behind it? How do you think that will be overcome by the non-practitioner?
Yeah.
Like we talk about technical, non-technical, but actually I think it's like in sport, it becomes even more about the practitioner background to understanding the environment.
100%. 100%. I think we spoke about this. I remember actually when we first spoke, and something I'm really passionate about is trying to, empower the athlete to be at the forefront of that conversation with, a product team or, a performance team that's looking to invest in a new product. Because for me, ultimately, like they're the ones like I always kind of come back to. And I spoke to this in the conference in New York, is that ultimately the athlete is the one that has to go out there and perform, right? They have to execute at the highest level, under the highest level of pressure in uncertain environments where it's chaotic and, everything is going on. That's, to me, is what I define as high level, performance. And so we have to take a step back and realize that we're asking them to do that at the highest level consistently over time. We're almost like depleting from them with all these types of, technology that we're trying to impart on them. And all they really want is clarity in their decision making. They're able to make decisions, under pressure with clarity. It's the same thing with a coach. And so coming in from that perspective, is they're the ones that can really, I think, drive and co-create some of these, new innovations, is ultimately where I would want to take it, because we have to empower them into know that, their data is something that they own, which a lot of athletes still don't even to this day, that they, own their own data and they can do what they want with it ultimately. And how can they, again, leverage that data in a way that's, conducive to them, not necessarily, the environment or the team that they might work for. So to me, that's something I'm super passionate about. And I think that's where I think we're starting to see a lot more companies on the product side, take that co-creation kind of pathway earlier on, in inviting them into the conversation before, the product it's like commercially, viable. It's having them kind of taste test it and get a feel for, understanding their real performance problems, right? Like what problem are you really trying to solve?
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, because I think quite often we focus on the practitioner, possibly because they're the one that's going to have to use it, or because they have more of a say over the budget and like what we actually going to buy. But as you say, like you could buy a load of tech, and if the athlete then either refuses or doesn't adopt it, then you've got a lot of full shelves and rather than actually it being used. So it's a really interesting point about the athlete side. Just pulling the conversation back slightly, you mentioned about the New York event. I couldn't get out there, but Susie from STRN kindly invited me, and you were speaking at it, as well as obviously the format of it was a very open tables, discussions and things. If you had to pick like 2 or 3 main insights that you felt came out of that day, what were they as the kind of like cutting edge conversation going on around sports tech? Because what I also loved about that event is that you've had so many different stakeholders within the same room. So investors to product founders and CEOs to the actual teams. So bringing all those stakeholders into the room together to have these open conversations. What were your main takeaways? if people
Yeah.
haven't read your LinkedIn post on it.
No, I'd definitely say check some of those out, but even not even just mine. Like there's some great energy and great.
They're coming through all the time. I'm seeing them.
Yeah, some great like collaborative thoughts. So for me, that was like the bigger goal was to try and get different minds from different perspectives and see like what we could kind of create. And it was it was a great event. Just I think just on that, and I guess the whole premise behind it was like what next? Like what's the action from this? And Christoph and did a great job of kind of curating that in the different sessions that we had. And I guess for me, the top three, I guess, would be if you had to really push me. Number one would be about trying to get as many different perspectives in a room, and understanding where everyone's coming from. But and again, we already said this is like having that shared understanding that it's okay to disagree, but having like a commonality in that goal. And then it's okay that, we're only working for maybe a short period of time on this project when we come out and realize that, that's okay. But the long-term vision of a, long-standing innovation or product development, there's always going to be those, different time points where other people are going to take priority or other people are going to push things forward. And like I said before, like that momentum piece, right? We want to always try and sustain momentum, but knowing that those different stakeholders place different levels of importance at different times, and that's okay. And that was a really interesting, I think, piece around when we did some like collective thinking of that when we're trying to bring a product through, it's never a seamless start to finish. There's so many different ups and downs, and being okay with that, right? And understanding that people have capacity for only a certain amount of things, and as long as that's understood and that's okay. That would be my first thing. And then second thing, I guess, would be just around understanding that, I guess we've already kind of touched on this, but it's such a prominent point, is that collecting data, like for data's sake, is only as, as powerful as, the people, right, that are actually able to, produce that data into insights and wisdom. And so we need to strengthen human, to human connection before we kind of keep strengthening AI and all this next generation, technology, because ultimately we need to be the gatekeepers, right, on a very human level. And that was a huge point, I think, that was made by people on and throughout the days, that ultimately, if we want to have a main stakeholder in what happens in the future and how we evolve as a people, then we need to be really intentional, right, and focus our attention. I raised reference to a paper that came out in 2017, I think, and it was all around how technology is shifting our attention in not necessarily a constructive way, and maybe how can we really, I guess, reframe our thinking in understanding that where we're going as a species, right, as a society, is shifting away from things that may be a lot more important in life in terms of how we connect with people on a human to human level. So that was definitely a big one, I would say. And then lastly, I would say the big thing was around ecosystem, right? And I think Christoph has done a great job of developing and curating that kind of ecosystem that gets these types of minds together. And I think we can be even more, I guess, productive in the future when we can create like an ecosystem that's shared across so many different platforms and mediums. And again, the bigger thing is trying to come away from creating, frameworks are nice, and, academic papers are great, but really trying to create some practical tools that help people day to day in strengthening their own environments and strengthening their own level of thinking and levels of, curiosity around the problems that they're facing, right? That's, to me, what we're really trying to drive in this industry of high performance, whether you're coming at from a sports perspective, a product perspective, a leadership perspective, is that we're trying to drive like a collective energy to really change and transmit something into something bigger.
So I think that's a really important point you were making around kind of universities, because all commercial models have been disrupted, but we don't want just to create more research for the sake of it. Like, we're also now out of that phase of just having more data for the sake of it. It actually has to mean something. It has to change the decision, change the judgment, or something along that roadmap. Otherwise, it's like a bit of kind of what's the point? And I was talking to some people who can access some funding, and they're like, I don't want to just do that work and be busy doing that work to access that funding. You actually want to kind of move things forward. Yeah. And I think it also links into what you were saying around, it's really hard to have a longer roadmap at the moment because of technology and how quickly things are moving. You might have a 12-month plan, and within 3 months, you've done 12 months worth of learning because things are moving so quickly. So you have to have this really agile approach and shorter learning windows with a real ability to, as you say, have those honest conversations that, look, this is what we were planning to do, but even within this short period, we've learned so much that we actually need to go off in this direction. And that doesn't mean that we're wrong. It just actually means that we're being agile, and it's a strategy that then works because you're responding to how either the market's changing, the technology's changing, or just to people's feedback on that. I'm really keen to think about, like, specifically around wearables. Like, there's a lot of gaps, I think, between kind of what wearables, which is what you were looking at in your PhD studies, do and what actually people want to know from those. How do you kind of bridge that translation and making that, like, I suppose, specific to not just sports tech generally, but the what you've been researching within your PhD?
Yeah, no, that's a great point to definitely come on to. I think that's like the most important thing at the end of the day. Like, what are we really trying to change? Like, those are the questions that are really at the crux of what can really impact people in like in a real powerful way. And so, like, just to quickly go back to that point, like, you're so right. And that was one of the other points that we touched on at the conference, was around like that issue and that tension, right? We have technology that wants to move at the speed of like the possibilities, right, of what could be. And then research wants to move at the speed of like proof. Everything has to be approved. And right. And that progress between like navigating that space is where practitioners like yourselves and people like kind of sit in that gap that you're talking about. And for me, we're in a really powerful place purely because we can be, like you said, agile and flexible and have that kind of adaptive level of thinking to see the problems and see those like fatiguing kind of friction points in a process and kind of say, look, no, we need to pull back here and kind of diverge and go in this direction. And I think that's really places as an important point of understanding that, like you said, it's okay to maybe disagree, but understanding that where we're coming from at that place of understanding, that we're not trying to just prove for the sake of proving something. Like, we're actually trying to change, the narrative and how we create, insights and really drive innovation. And so for me, like one of the biggest things I think that we talk about is decision making. I don't know, you've done some really great pieces recently on like decision making and how that looks in the environment and what that can kind of mean moving forward. And I've kind of thought about it in a few different ways and trying to reverse engineer, I guess, from a performance perspective, like the performance problems around, what are the decisions that we're actually trying to influence? They look very different, right, on a day-to-day level when you're working in a team and in a high performance setting. So you have like the kind of acute decision making that athletes and coaches need to make, and then even like more micro level, like the real time decisions that they have to make, on the spot, in the moment, in the time. Like, and so from a product perspective, I've kind of the way I kind of think and trying to get, I guess, more people in that kind of space to think about from a product perspective is what, decision clock are you really trying to influence? So we have different clocks, different times that we're trying to influence and different windows in which we can actually influence those decisions. So for example, like you said, wearable technology is come in and it's been great and it's innovated in a lot of different ways because it's, more easily accessible, the burden is lower, but the insights are still at a level where they're very retrospective, right? They're not kind of in real time. And we're getting close to that where we're starting to see a lot more real time insight that are being delivered, and that creates its own problems. But ultimately, it's really, it's really trying to ensure that on a real level, that the actual decision that you're trying to implement or influence is coming at the correct decision window, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if it's outside of that window, then it loses its level of leverage in an environment where you might want to have, say, that conversation with an athlete, but it's come at a time where it's no longer relevant to them. Like, they just discard that and they don't need to think about it. It's what's next. And we're constantly in an environment in high performance where it's all about what's next. What's next? What's the next challenge? What's the next thing that I can do to improve my performance? And that's where we need to be really intentional when we're working with companies and teams on that product side, is really understanding like where their influence lies with that product decision that they're really trying to influence.
Yeah. When you talk, I think there's a really interesting tension there, isn't there, between, as you say, the speed that technology can move, the speed that the research wants it to move, but then there's also along that, it's like the humans, we all move at different speeds.
Right.
But also, if you lose the human in that mix, you've lost the whole pathway of innovation anyway. And I like what you kind of like, the side note about that comes like real time comes with issues, because the way, having been highly educated on this now by Alan McDonald and his decision making work as well, it's like we can do all this amazing aggregation of the data and clean it all up and bring it to a point, and then you hand the actual decision back to the human, who is the messy, emotional, tired, stressed, uncalibrated kind of like. So at what point do we stop innovating the tech and actually kind of bring the focus back on, as you say, the humans, the communication, the way to work together to kind of solve a problem, or even highlight what the problem is that you're looking to address and solve? And that can take rounds of iteration to get the same, because there's a real difference between consensus on something and commitment to actually do it. And if you get you all have a conversation, and then you get every person to say that conversation again, they will say it completely differently. And so it's like, have you really? Is there a consensus of what's going on? So like, I'm sure based on what we've talked about there and your feelings around kind of the human side, there must be a point where you go, let's stop on the tech and let's actually look back at the humans. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, but again, that was another really powerful point, and maybe I didn't explain it the best in terms of what came out of the conference, but that was definitely at the forefront of trying to strengthen that human to human connection that you're talking about, and strengthen our own appreciation of all these insights that are coming. Is like, how are we digesting it as people? And I guess the way I like to think of it, and I've been doing a lot of research in myself and my own process as a wannabe athlete still, and how do I take all these absorb all this information, right? And it goes back to the point of, what are you capable of absorbing? Like, what do you have the capacity for, right, to absorb? And I think that's huge. And so I think we're always trying to think of things from a place where, how can we get back to like an equilibrium, right? And I've always been, how do we get to this state where we're just like, everything's on this level playing field? And I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think we ever get to that point. We're always in this flux, as I referenced before, this flux, tension, calibration that we're trying to chase. I don't think we ever get to that state of like complete homeostasis, if you want to take it to that level. Like, it never happens. And so
it's like when people talk about work-life balance, it's like, what's that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't exist. And so for me, it's more about trying to understand and have that like internal understanding of yourself and awareness. And products and innovation are great at doing that, right? That self-regulation piece. But how do we know as people how much of that do we need from external versus internal? Like, that's why I'm really excited about some of the research that's starting to come out from a guy that's actually, I'll definitely connect you with him, and he'd be a great person to have if you're willing to speak, Patrick. Welsh. So he's doing some great work
Okay.
in terms of introspection and understanding how, awareness is really, created in different environments for the human, but then also on a global scale. So
Yeah.
really interesting research there in terms of like how
Yeah.
do we calibrate that within ourselves, but also within in an environment where we're asked to do different tasks and different things. So I guess for me, like I have this kind of idea of that, we have our habits, right? The habits that are embedded into like our daily routines. And then we have to have the skills to apply it. Like if you don't have the skills and like the knowledge base, that knowledge bank, then how can we really interpret and apply it in an effective way?
Mm.
That, and then the final piece is the trust. I think I spoke a little bit about this before, and that can be like a really wishy-washy thing. But for me, it's a lot deeper than that. Like trust is at the forefront of everything, because if we can't be authentic and understanding that I'm coming from a place of trust in this product, in this person, in the way I like to, go about everyday interactions, then ultimately I'm not going to be able to come, produce confidence, in the best
Yeah.
way that I can,
Yeah.
right, into someone. Like we have to be
Yeah.
authentic enough to deliver that whatever we're delivering, the insight, that level of information, with that level of confidence that then that person really trusts what we're saying, and that takes time, right? That's the
Yeah.
difficult thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for me, it's about those kind of three things. Do you have the habits? Have you set yourself up for success with the habits? Do you then have the skill and the knowledge bank to do it? And then finally, are you like coming from a place of trust with that, relationship, whoever it may be with?
Yeah, brilliant. Jordan, you're coming towards the end of your PhD, which I'm sure you are pleased. What are you working on at the moment? Where do you take these thoughts and this research and this time that you spent on it going forward? What's the next steps for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really an interesting space that's like continuing to evolve, and I'm really excited to work in that kind of that gap that you spoke about, around like that translation piece. Like, how do we really translate everything into impact, and trying to kind of shift people's perspective of how they look at performance problems, and then trying to
Hmm.
help people understand and educate them around that, approach of reverse engineering from the problem instead of working upstream. Can we work more downstream, and tackle some of those issues? And so for me, whether it's, consulting, whether it's on that kind of level of consulting different products, development teams, I'm also interested in like continuing some different levels of research around athlete engagement in data and wearable technology, and that kind of co-creation piece. Like how can we work together to create products that are really ultimately serving the athlete in the best possible way, and reducing
Yeah.
that kind of tension and that friction. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about a few different projects that I'm working on, that really, put the athlete at the forefront and really try to, you know, strive for innovation, but not for the sake of innovation.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's some real interesting even from the point of view of like athletes investing in products that they've adopted, athletes becoming
Right.
co-owners of clubs that they're involved in. Like
Yeah.
that power is coming back. Athletes having control over their kind of commercial and as you say, as well as their performance data. So that empowerment I see happening across actually multiple verticals, which I think is really exciting to bring the athlete really into the conversation of the future, because without them, sport doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, like
Yeah,
me personally, I guess it comes back to like education and empowerment, like, as you said. Like
yeah,
I still see myself as a coach. Like I'm a performance scientist, but I still see myself that wants to impart knowledge on people and help them in their journey,
yeah,
whether that's with wearable technology, whether that's with, a conversation about wearable technology or not. Both have like it places, right? And it's understanding like where do we fit all this into a bigger puzzle, right? Of
yeah,
someone's day, of someone's week, of someone's month, of someone's year, or someone's career, right? And ultimately,
yeah.
I've had this idea recently around adaptive reserve. And so
Okay.
the point of what we're trying to do, I think it's on every level, like it can be, the highest performing athlete, think of LeBron James, think of, I don't know, whoever you want to put at the top, Messi, Ronaldo. the longevity
Let's
of
put a female one in there.
Oh, we have to. Yeah, sorry, I'm terrible. Yeah, that's bad.
Mary ups. Yeah.
My wife would not be happy with me for sure. If she had it her way, she'd be making me wear a Nike shirt that says "Everyone loves women's sports." So yeah,
I've seen those ones at the cricket the other weekend. They're brilliant.
yeah, I get slap on the wrist for that.
Sorry,
yeah,
I interrupted you. Go on.
No. It's great. It's great. But yeah, this kind of concept around adapt and reserve, and how do we kind of capture that in understanding that we all want longevity and like health span and lifespan, right? And how do we work within ourselves, and whether it's through technology, whether it's through human connection, and in instilling that level of adaptive reserve where we're constantly not just depleting all the time. And we're coming from a place where we're actually trying to understand if something is coming into my environment, right? If I am going to adopt this new technology, if I am going to, build this relationship with this person, how much is this going to, allow me to continue to give in my own journey, in my own performance, rather than depleting. Yeah. And sometimes it's about, knowing what to. I have this thing around like strategic deletion. So things that you delete out your environment, some things you keep and have on hold, and then some things that you go forward with. And it's kind of all based around that. So the adaptive reserve of everyone is different at different points in time. And you kind of referenced it already, right? Emotional, cognitive, physical, etc.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's about how can we create more products that understand that as a capacity that we have. Like it's constantly changing and evolving at all different times. And so
they need to be intelligent, don't they? And in its broadest form. I'm not saying that's a specific type of AI or something, but they do need to live with us and be dynamic with us.
Yeah. And it's like skillfully coping, right? It's like a big buzzword that people sometimes like to use. And like it's that is what life is about ultimately, or performance. Like how can you continue to evolve and continue that momentum, right? That's so important. Whilst going through all the life's traumas that everything like that life brings you, right? Whether that's going through a difficult time, with a performance, whether it's a relationship, anything outside of like what really matters is depleting in some way. And so how are we able to better shape products around that kind of idea that, the adaptive reserve is really at the crux of what we're trying to, create sustained momentum around.
Yeah. I love that. We won't go into it in this conversation, but there's another stakeholder that we haven't brought massively into the conversation that is so important in this, and that's probably investors, because they want a return, they want the money, they work at a different speed again. But like without them as well, the tech doesn't innovate. Things don't happen. Even now, we need them to buy the sports teams and the franchises and the leagues. And so there's that whole kind of investor piece of marrying those conversations together. Jordan, I've loved this. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to connect with you, find out more about your work and things, where can they find you? Where's the best place?
Yeah, so I'm kind of active on LinkedIn, I guess the most at the moment. LinkedIn, kind of Instagram, kind of share a few different ideas and things on there. But yeah, I'll definitely be finishing my PhD. So if you want to take that more academic route and look at some papers, and hopefully they'll be coming out in the near future as well. But yeah, I think for me, it's, if you want to just drop me an email, I'm always more than happy to have a conversation and explore what someone's working on, or, a project that we can kind of collaborate on. So yeah, always happy to kind of connect with people, and yeah, pretty easy to find nowadays. Most people are, so.
Brilliant. Well, I will make sure they're all in the show notes as well. Jordan, as I say, thank you so much for your time. Great conversation.
No, it's been amazing. Thank you so much. Let the conversation continue.